You guys, first of all, thank you everybody for being here, and I love our time together. Merle and I were sharing just before we started about how this is kind of a highlight of the week for us, and so we love it. So thank you everybody for being here and for doing that. If you have your Bibles, take them out and turn to Revelation chapter 3 because that's where we're going to be. If you don't know where Revelation is, it's the last book of the Bible before the maps. Okay, so you can get there. So I have to tell you, I enjoy studying history, and one of the things I love to study about history is to discover the reason why certain cities and towns were established. Sometimes they were along a river and they needed a place to stop, and so that city would just grow, or maybe the railroad came through, or different things. The city of St. Louis, which is a city that I grew up in, was established in 1764 as a fur trading outpost by Frenchman Pierre Laclede, and he selected it because it was at where what is called the confluence, where the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers come together. It's where Lewis and Clark officially launched their Corps of Expedition as well, but it caused that city to become a very important city. And later on, it was known as the Gateway to the West because as the westward expansion started moving out, it became known as the Gateway City. And another city is Placerville, California. Now, you may not know of Placerville, California, but I bet you've heard of the gold rush of the 1840s. Placerville, California was a town where that originated and started because they discovered gold nearby, and it launched the gold rush of the 1840s. Washington, D.C. Interesting story on why Washington, D.C. was founded. It was literally founded in a way that no other city in the United States was founded. In July 16th, 1790, it was founded because it was established by the U.S. Constitution that it would become the seat of government for this new country called the United States of America. And it was named after our first president and our founding father, George Washington. Today we're going to be taking a look at a city called Philadelphia. Now, not the Philadelphia that is in Pennsylvania, but the ancient city of Philadelphia. And it was founded because it was a gateway to Asia Minor. In other words, the way the land came together, there was these volcanic mountains, the volcanoes were dormant, and they created this funnel. And Philadelphia was planted right there as people would travel to and from Asia Minor. And it was founded because the Greeks wanted to spread their culture. And so they knew that everybody had to come through there. And so it became kind of a beachhead for Greek culture as it spread into Asia Minor. So we're going to talk about the ancient city of Philadelphia. I got to be honest with you, as I was studying for this, I had a strong desire for a Philadelphia cheesesteak, a Philly cheesesteak, and I did not get one. So I may still have to figure out how to do that. But the ancient city of Philadelphia is interesting. We are continuing our series out of the book of Revelation, in which God gave instructions to John to write letters to 7 new churches that have been established. And these letters were meant to encourage them and correct them and keep pointing them towards the future because times were very tough. And so he wrote a letter to each of the 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, and last week we learned about Sardis. This week we're on number 6, which is the church in Philadelphia. So turn your Bibles to Revelation chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 7. And as you're doing that, I want to kind of give you some background about the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was located about 30 miles southeast of Sardis, which is a city that Justin Fleur taught about so well last weekend. It was founded by the king of Pergamum in 190 BC. We don't know his name because he was hardly known by his name. He was known by his nickname, and his nickname was Philadelphus. And Philadelphus means brotherly love. And the reason he earned this nickname was because he and his brother were very close. Now, we don't know what his name was. His brother's name was Eumenes the Second. I got to be honest with you, I'm not sure there would have been a Eumenes II because that's kind of an odd-sounding name. But Eumenes II and his brother Philadelphus were best friends. And so when they established the city of Philadelphia, he wanted to name it after his best friend and his brother. And so it was called the city of Philadelphia, and it's a city of brotherly love. It literally comes from a Greek word, phileo, which means brotherly love. Phileo, that's a Greek word. We don't use it a lot, but it means that kind of love that we have for our other humankind, for men and for women, that we just love them. Phileo. And so that's where the church came. That's where the name of the city came, was Philadelphia. Now, there were some things that we need to know about Philadelphia that are really important in this study. Like I said earlier, it was surrounded by these dormant volcanoes, and the volcanic the sediment that came off of them was rich in nutrients and minerals. And so what that meant is that they had a great opportunity to grow different things. And one of the things the city of Philadelphia was known for was its tremendous vineyards. The climate and the soil were perfect for growing these great vineyards. But the second thing is, because of the way that the city was formed and where it was by these volcanoes, it was on the edge of a couple of tectonic plates. Now, these are the plates that are underneath the surface of the earth, and that's why volcanoes would come up, because the lava from the middle of the earth would come out. But it also meant that they experienced earthquakes a lot. In fact, the historian Strabo was quoted as saying this in one of his writings: "Earthquakes and aftershocks were almost a daily occurrence." Now, can you imagine living in a beautiful part of the world with beautiful vineyards and crops, but yet you had earthquakes or aftershocks almost every day, to where it just became normal? In fact, for a lot of people it was normal, but for some of the residents of Philadelphia it wasn't normal, because what they would do is they actually moved outside the city because they didn't want to have a building fall on their head, and they would live in homes that were just very simple with thatched roofs. So if an earthquake came and destroyed their home, nobody would get hurt. So it's an unusual kind of thing. But Philadelphia, as I said, was established to be a gateway city to Asia Minor. It was to expand and to help promote the Greek culture. And that's where we find this early church. So let's start off in Revelation chapter 3, verse 7. It says, "To the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." You see, God uses a metaphor here, which is a word picture. He actually uses two of them to help us understand. The first metaphor is we see Jesus holding a key. Now, we all have keys, maybe to our home, maybe to our vehicle, maybe to a padlock somewhere, or a workplace, or a boat, or something like that. We have keys. You need the key to get to whatever that you're wanting to get to. You need the key to protect it. And this metaphor says that Jesus is holding a key. The neat thing about a key is a key works only for one specific lock. And so what we get from this first thing is that Jesus has the ability to unlock any problem that we have. Jesus has the ability to unlock any problem that we have. In other words, another way to put it is this: Jesus is the specific solution for any problem that we have. Now you may be thinking, Michael, I don't know if I believe that. I mean, I've got some problems, and Jesus is a busy man. How can we do that? Because he's the Son of God, like we said last week. Anybody that comes back from the grave, I'm going to believe. If he said he would rise again, and he did, anything else he says is true. And so Jesus, in the first metaphor, has the ability to unlock any problem that we have. But the second part of that, it says that he can open doors or he can close doors. He can open and close gates or windows. You see, the second part of that is that Jesus has the ability to open or close opportunities for us, especially those opportunities for us to love others and to spread his message. We're going to come back to that. So let's go on in Revelation chapter 3 and let's read verse 8, because it says, this is God speaking, "I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name." Now, this is speaking specifically to those early Christians because, as we said, Philadelphia was an open door to Asia Minor, and God was saying, even though it's hard for you, you have an open door where instead of just Greek culture being shared with Asia Minor, that we can share the good news of God's love and his forgiveness. So he's encouraging those Christians. And I can't help but think about us today, because here's one truth from the Bible: God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So what he said then was true then. What he said then is still true today. And one interesting thing is for us, this is what I think his message to us here, is that the door is open. There's opportunities. You know, I love hearing stories about how our church family is just a church family. We see a need, and we meet the need to the best of our ability. Last Wednesday night, we had our family gathering, and as I was walking through that and teaching at the end of the family gathering, a prayer request came up at the bottom of the chat. I didn't know it because I was teaching, but as it was going on, a couple, one of our church family, read about that prayer request and said, we can meet that need. And within 24 hours, they were able to work to meet that need, to help a single mom to be able to do some basic things to take care of her kids. That's what I love. We see the open door that God has opened, and we walk through it. We see the open window, and we don't just stand back, but we do everything we can to go through it. And I love how he says, I know your deeds, and I've placed opportunities before you. Here's one of the questions that I think we need to consider today is this. What door of opportunity has God opened for you? What door of opportunity has God opened for us? And the second question is, how do we respond? Because I believe that God does open doors of opportunities. Do we have our eyes open so we can see it? And secondly, how do we respond? You know, 4 years ago, this past Monday, my family and I drove here to Elizabethtown, Kentucky to pray about if God was calling us to be able to come here to help launch the Southeast Christian Church Elizabethtown campus. And we didn't know a whole lot about Elizabethtown or Hardin County or Central Kentucky. But as we drove that day, and my family, I can remember us praying a really specific prayer that day. We prayed, God, if it's your will to open the door for ministry here, we ask that you open it wide open. We also prayed, God, if it is not your will you close the door? Will you lock it? Will you padlock it? Will you put lumber over it? Will you pile furniture in front of it? So we know this is not where God is calling us. Well, we felt that day that God was opening a door of ministry for the Cast family to move here to Hardin County to begin ministering and building up a church family. And you know what? That prayer was prayed over and over again. Every time we added another staff person in their family, they went through almost the exact same thing. They spent time praying for God. God, if this is your will, God, if this is an open door, would you throw it wide open? God, if this is not the open door, would you just make it really obvious? And I saw as our staff started to grow, and then I watched as some of our first members of our church family started coming on. God started pulling them, and God started opening doors and opening windows, and they started responding and coming here. And now you can see what God has done in building this church family. It's because God opens doors of opportunity. The question is, are we going to walk through it? Well, let's read on. Revelation chapter 3, we're going to read verses 9 through 12. It says, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command and endured patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come upon the whole earth to test those who live on the earth. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Him who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of God. Never again will he leave it. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on him a new name. Now, I love that. That sounds a little complicated when you look at it. But basically, in verse 9, we see the Church of Philadelphia was under persecution because there were some people who claimed to be Christians, but their life was not honoring of God. In fact, he calls them, what does he call them? The synagogue of Satan. Now, I don't know. I don't live a perfect life, but I hope God never calls me that. But then in verse 10, we see the promise from God that since they've been faithful, those early believers, that God would protect them and he would be there in their hour of need. I totally believe that this is still true today. If we put our faith and trust in Jesus, he will be there in our hour of need. He will be there in those times where we just need a little bit of help, but more importantly, he'll be there in those moments where we don't know where to turn. Those moments where we don't know what to say or what to do, when all we can do is cry out to God and say, God, help me. God promises to be there. Verse 11 says that he is coming soon. It doesn't mean that he was coming right after that. It meant that he will come suddenly. You read verses all through the Bible that say, I will come like a thief in the night. We don't know the time or the day or the hour. As believers, that's not our job to figure out when he's going to come, because I personally believe if we were to accidentally pick the right day, he'd change it just so we weren't right. Our job is not to figure out the day. Our job is to live our life in a way that when that moment comes, we are ready to go. And in verse 12, he gives us 3 promises for those that overcome. The first promise is this. He says, I will make you a pillar in the house of God. A pillar is a place of prominence. You know, honestly, my goal is just to make it into heaven. Like, just get me there. I don't need the biggest mansion. As long as I'm in, I'm good. But God says if we follow him, if we hold on, if we stand firm, that we will become what he calls a pillar. And then it also says that it will be an eternal pillar. We will be placed there permanently, that God's promises are forever. They don't go away, they don't end, but they're forever. And then he says that he will not only write God's name on us, but he will give us a new name. Wow, that was a great promise for that early church in Philadelphia. But think about the promise for us today. And so I started thinking about this question. I said, you know, if I could live my life in a way that I could kind of sort of choose the name that God would give me, what would that be? I want you to think about that. If God were to name you, to give you a special name based upon your best quality of following him, what would that be? Would it be Michael the Faithful? I don't know. Or how about Forgiver? Or Encourager? Or Wise? Or Undaunted? What about Passionate? Or Purposeful? Or Committed? Or Persistent? Or Tenacious? Or Thankful? Or Prayerful? Or Joyful? Or Peacemaker? Or Patient? Or Hopeful? What name would you hope that God would give you? Well, I think here's our challenge, is this. If God's going to give us a name that's true, then we better start living it. I think it might be a great challenge for us to pick out one descriptor that we would like to have and kind of make that our one word for the rest of the summer, maybe for the rest of the year. And say, for the rest of the year, this is how I'm going to live. I'm going to be known by my forgiveness or my encouragement or my joy or my prayerfulness or whatever. If God could give you a name, what would it be? And then I love how it's wrapped up, this letter to the Church of Philadelphia. He just says what he says to almost all the other churches in verse 13. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. In other words, hey, you need to hear this and you need to live this. So here's what I'd like to encourage you to do. I'd like to encourage you to consider 2 questions that we briefly talked about. The first question is, what door of opportunity has God opened for you, and how have you responded? God opens the door. He holds the keys. Remember, he opens the door. How have you responded? And the second question is this. If you could pick what name God were to give you in heaven, what would you pick? What characteristic, what quality would you want to exhibit in your life? And then why would you want that? So those are 2 questions. Those are big questions, but I think that it helps us as we dive in and we try and live out what God wants us to know from a church that was 2,000 years ago, but a God who's never changed.